Senator Patterson, we can come back to you now.
Thanks, Chair, and apologies for bringing the levity of the committee down, but yeah. Rhiannon Down and Paul Garvey of The Australian have just posted an article online, which I've asked my office to provide to the Secretariat so it can be circulated. It's entitled "Rapist Attacks 26 Women Kids and is Allowed to Retain His Visa." And while that's being provided, I'll quote some relevant excerpts. "A remorseless serial rapist who attacked 26 women and children kept his visa as a result of Andrew Giles' catastrophic push to give more leniency to foreign-born criminals with ties to Australia. As it was revealed, the embattled Immigration Minister was warned his policy would lead to a huge rise in offenders successfully beating deportation." I'll move down to the specifics about this new case that The Australian has uncovered.
Never been wrong about this.
In a new case uncovered by The Australian, British-born masseur and rapist Charles William Davidson in February had the cancellation of his visa revoked despite having been convicted of 8 counts of rape, 48 counts of sexual assault and 3 counts of indecent treatment of children under 16. In sentencing, the judge has said the serial rapist has demonstrated absolutely no remorse whatsoever, and it goes on. This is absolutely horrific offending. This is a textbook case of someone who should not be in our community regardless of how long they are here. How on earth have we found ourselves in a situation where, as a result of a ministerial direction, the AAT is allowing people like this to stay in our country?
Well, I think, you have just pointed us to an article that none of us have had an opportunity to read, let alone fact check. So I think we would probably need a little bit of time to do that.
Minister, just on a human level, surely you can react to that information.
Well, I'd want to make sure that everything in the article is accurate to begin with. I'm not saying it's not, I just don't know.
This decision was in February. This is not a long time ago. The department should be across this case. Is the department aware of this case?
Senator, I'm sorry, I just don't...
I see people shaking their heads, but Hansard won't pick that up.
I just don't have enough information to be able to answer that question sensibly.
I just think, Senator Patterson, I understand you've said that this has recently been published, but no one in this room has it except for you. If that's something that you can...
well, I've asked the Secretariat to circulate it.
Well...
It's only just gone online.
You should be mindful of the fact that's not going to happen immediately, and you're putting questions to the officials about something that's not in front of them. I presume that's what the Minister's looking at on his iPad.
I'm reading the article for the first time now. What I can tell you, Senator Patterson, is that the Minister's office has just informed me that neither they nor the Minister were made aware of this case, and they've now asked the department to add this case to the list of urgent cases for cancellation submissions.
Yeah, I would hope so. As the article goes on, that deportation, however, was cancelled after the AAT ruled that a very heavy level of weight should be given to the strength of Davidson's ties to Australia. Although he was born in Scotland, he'd moved to Australia at the age of 5. Isn't this exactly the issue that we were discussing earlier, that if you put great weight, regardless of the level of offending, in the words of the Ministerial Direction 99, on an applicant's ties to Australia, it doesn't matter how horrific their offending is, as it appears to be in this case, they'll be allowed to stay in our country? Well,
no, I don't. This is the whole point, is that I understand it's your political objective to blame a minister in our government for decisions made by the AAT. I understand that's your political objective. But you ignore the fact that the direction is very clear that there are 5 primary considerations that AAT members should take into account. And one of them is very clearly the seriousness of the offending. If AAT members decide to interpret that guidance in a way that favours one consideration over another and doesn't pay adequate weight to the seriousness of the offending, then that's a decision that's on them. It's not on the minister.
I would accept that evidence, Minister, if it was an isolated case, if it was just one decision by one AAT member. But we now have circa 30 cases where consistently AAT members are making decisions to overturn the cancellation of a visa and citing this provision of the minister's guidance. one, we could attribute to them and be their fault, but this is systemic. This is happening across the board. How is it not a result of the direction?
Well, that is, and that now that the minister is aware of those cases, he is taking action.
One of the actions the minister could take is to revise or repeal Direction 99. Has the government given any consideration to doing that?
I would have to take that on notice. I don't know.
Ms Foster, has the government sought your advice about the logistics of revoking 99 or returning to a previous direction?
Not mine, Senator. I'll check with my staff to see if they have more generally. I was also wanting to make the point that what I'm trying to understand is not just whether the AAT cited that particular provision, but how they assessed the others.
Sure.
And that's one of the things that our General Counsel has been working through to look at the
But
balance of the arguments.
To my question, if, as you said, you're not aware, but if any other officers are aware, please correct the record. The Minister's office has sought no advice on revoking 99 or amending 99?
Senator, we have given some advice on options for Ministerial Direction 99.
And what are the options?
They were very operational in nature. I wouldn't mind taking that on notice and just getting some conferring.
If government decided that Direction 99 has had unintended consequences, to take the most charitable interpretation, and it needs to be fixed, how would you go about doing that?
Well, it would come across both policy and there would potentially be some legal changes to it.
But if you wanted to amend 99 to make it no longer a primary consideration, return it to being a secondary consideration, or change the detail of the supporting advice, how would you do that? What's the process?
Oh, what's the process? Sorry, beg your pardon.
Process, a ministerial direction, a new ministerial direction would need to be written and issued and then applied across all caseloads.
Okay.
And that would replace 99.
Here's an idea.
Okay. Another case uncovered by the Australian is the deportation of a Chilean citizen who'd sexually molested 3 of his wife's nieces, and the child of a friend was stopped after the AAT again cited the strength of the man's ties to Australia. He moved to Australia in 1987 at age 29. While noting community outrage towards sexual violence against children, AAT member Paul Farrell noted that the man's 2 adult children had given powerful evidence in support of their father. Another case is a Chinese man having, quote, the most extreme end of child abuse material. There were many more heinous and indescribable sexual acts, but the tribunal found that Direction 99's primary consideration of the strength of ties to Australia weighed heavily in favour of setting aside the visa cancellation. Quote, the applicant's ties to the Australian community must be found to be very strong, especially in circumstances where he spent his formative years here. This finding is augmented by the reality he's made contributions to the Australian community via his active involvement in the cultural community, and that he otherwise has no criminal history. Again, they are citing over and over again this relevant part of the ministerial direction as a decisive factor in their consideration.
But there's nothing in the direction that requires them to give that more weight than the seriousness of the offending. And again,
Well, how's that working out, Minister?
Sorry?
How's that working out?
Well, that's a very good question to ask those AAT members, and the AAT will be appearing at estimates in the next couple of days.
Yeah, I suspect we won't get a lot out of them, as I think you'll know. They won't comment on this. But, I mean, they're only following, as they're obliged to do, the directions issued by the government.
Well,
they're following it in a consistent way. All of them appear to be doing it in the same way.
You might say they are following the direction. I would say that they are interpreting this direction in a way that no minister in this government intended. And again, when Minister Giles was provided with advice by the department about this, and we talked about the desktop exercise that was done by the department, they observed that decision makers would need to consider the length of time that the person had spent in Australia, but that this consideration would need to be balanced against other considerations, including the seriousness of the conduct, recidivism and expectations of the Australian community. And frankly, AAT members should be considering those issues extremely seriously.
Secretary, how is it that the Australian newspaper can identify dozens of these cases and the Minister's office can't?
So, Senator, the obligation to bring these cases to the Minister's attention is ours. Going back to the sort of the weight that AAT...
Before you do, because that's a different question that I asked before, I'm asking this question now. The Minister, Mr Watt, just gave evidence before that in response to this article, Minister Giles has added this case, or these cases maybe, to the list of cases that you're required to consider. We all know about this issue now. It's out in the open. It's been there since late last week. The Australian is continuing, as a newspaper organisation, being not informed by you, to find these cases that then get subsequently added to the Minister's list of cases to look at for the department. How is it that you're not finding these cases? How is it that the Minister's office is not finding these cases with all the resources of government?
So, Senator, we are working through all of the cases as quickly as we can. I'm hesitating because I don't want to sound defensive. This is an absolute obligation on us to do this. It is more difficult to work with the total caseload than it is to find individual cases. So we have an obligation to look at the whole. What the journalists are able to do is identify individual...
Well, except that you might want to be able to identify individual cases for a ministerial decision to revoke a visa. And the Minister's just asked that you add to the list these cases found by the Australian that presumably he wasn't aware of an hour ago, otherwise it would have already been on your list. He's only aware of it because it's gone up on the Australian online, and I just asked Minister Watt about it.
And Senator, we're working as fast as we can through all of the relevant cases.
Not as fast as two journalists at the Australian, apparently.
But as I said, Senator, they can select individual cases. We have to work through the whole lot.
Yes, but it's individual cases that matter if you want to revoke someone's visa. Like, if I was the Minister and this had happened to me, I would want to know as many cases as quickly as possible that I could revoke to protect the community that hasn't been happening for however long.
Exactly what's
And
happening.
we're doing that, Senator.
I don't have confidence of that because the Minister just added a case to your workload based on a media report. You clearly hadn't provided this case to him, or his office hadn't found this case themselves.
What's your question,
And
Senator
we're working
Patterson?
as fast as we can. This is the top priority for me to work through as soon as we've become aware of it.
How many cases are we talking here? Hundreds?
I'm unsure, but again, we can take that on notice.
You
And
don't have an upper limit of how many cases this could be?
Not at this stage.
You don't know how many AAT decisions there were that revoked an initial decision to cancel a visa on character grounds?
Senator, I think that was some of the data I said to you. I wanted to get accurate before we went through it with you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not filled with confidence of these answers that we're not going to continue to be relying on media reports to discover about these cases.
Senator, we are, as Dr. Cassar said, working on it with all the resources that we can, and we will continue to give it our highest priority and get those cases to the Minister as quickly as we can.
Hopefully quicker than it has happened to date.
Is that a question?
No, thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Yes, I'll
Very